It looks, there we go. Okay, so I would like to call the General Government and Public Safety Committee to order on November 23rd. We have one agenda item. May I have a motion for
Move to
the,
approve the agenda as published.
Second.
it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carried. So next up is protocol for virtual meetings, and Scott and Dave Snyder.
Yes, let me start this topic up. You may recall Councilmember Kunkel brought this up in the age of sort of our virtual meetings, brought up the issue. So what if there was a technical difficulty right in the middle of a vote, and how would we proceed if that did occur? Which does make a lot of sense in terms of that issue, because I think from now into the future, we're going to have some kind of virtual component going forward. So that's the reason we're bringing this to you. We'd like to review that protocol with you. And I'm going to have Dave kind of walk through how that process would evolve if for some reason we had a disruption in our ability to be there virtually.
And that's happened to me. Luckily, Lenny took over, but yeah.
Okay, well, good morning, committee. I have the proposed amendments on my screen. Do you want me to share that, or does those committee members have it in front of them? How would you like me to go forward?
You can share it.
Okay.
Yeah, we have it, but it helps to see it from
Yep.
your
Yeah,
viewpoint.
I think that makes sense. So I'm just going to assume everybody can see unless you say otherwise. But what we're looking at here is a potential new chapter to the council committees and procedures. This would be chapter 7.11, and it would just specifically detail remote participation. And it just indicates, council members may appear remotely, and then it gives some conditions that need to be met. And the first one is that satisfactory equipment is available. There needs to be a presumption that if you're going to attend remotely, that you have the necessary equipment. City provided equipment would be preferred, but just anything that allows council members to participate clearly and effectively. The second condition puts a burden on the presiding officer just to state for the record that a particular council member is appearing remotely and the basis for that. Now, currently, of course, everything's remote. So the agenda indicates it's remote. I think just a blanket statement at the beginning that we're appearing remotely would certainly satisfy this. This condition would be more, going forward when the majority of council is in person and perhaps somebody's dialing in, that would be relevant. The third bullet just indicates, the voting is going to occur as if, they were physically present. The fourth just reiterates that OPMA, the Open Public Meetings Act regulations, and of course, all other policies and procedures are still relevant, whether you're remote or not. The fifth details that if technical difficulties prevent council members from participating in the meeting, that they need to be immediately addressed. And if the technical difficulties occur during a vote, then there's a particular procedure in section 9.12, and we're going to go over that. That'll be next, but this puts you towards that section. And then the sixth is just that, remote participation in an executive session shall be conducted in a manner that promotes and protects the confidential nature of the proceeding. So very straightforward. Any questions on this, or do we want to go into the section 9 and then maybe kind of see how they merge together?
Sure.
Yes.
So looking at voting procedures, this is an existing policy in your manual. And so this is redlined. You'll note that the previous section was entirely new. So this is going to be redlined here. And the first thing, there's a section or a sentence right at the beginning that indicates that unless a member of the council states that he or she is not voting, his or her silence shall be recorded as an affirmative vote. And given the concerns with technical difficulties, the potential for that via remote attendance, we're suggesting that be removed. And we'll detail this a little bit further down, that if in fact it's the presiding officer is unable to determine how somebody voted, then it doesn't count as a vote. It's not an affirmative vote. We'll tie into this a little bit later down below.
So that's going to change for me, because when I, as the presiding officer in a council meeting, I usually don't speak up. And so when I'm silent, that is an affirmative according to our past voting procedures. So are you going forward? I'm going to have to change that.
Well, I think, Mr. Mayor, let's further down here, it's going to address that very point. And there are some changes that we're suggesting. Of course, these are just suggested changes. So I think that point will come up further down here.
Okay, thank you.
So then,
You don't vote, Andy.
It's just a matter of the flow of the, I mean, it's been my style, right? I only vote. I'm always voting in the affirmative unless I know it's going to be a really close vote. Then I will speak up, but I'm usually casting my vote in the affirmative by being silent. It's just the way, if you noticed over the past how many years, that's the way I do it.
so moving on, you can see we have a section called voting process, and votes will be cast in an audible tone of voice if possible. Again, if it's virtual and there's technical difficulties, it may not be possible. If unable, then due to technical difficulties or otherwise, votes may be cast by clear hand signal. At the conclusion of the vote, the presiding officer shall summarize the total votes, both for and against, and state whether any council members voted by clear hand signal. If the presiding officer is unable to make such determination, then the undetermined vote shall not be considered. Only those votes that the presiding officer can determine shall be considered. And then, so that would be applicable in every vote, whether in person or otherwise. And then there's specific process when participation by remote communication occurs, and that's what's to follow. And then it just kind of reiterates that council members may appear remote pursuant to 711. That's the section that we previously went over. And then during any meeting in which there is a remote communication, be it by everybody or just a single, the following procedures shall follow. For all questions put to the council vote, the presiding officer will repeat the names of the council members that presented and seconded the motion. And this is more for record keeping for the clerk. The presiding officer will take a vote on the item by roll call. A council member attending via remote communication must provide an audible vote so that any participant may hear their vote. So the roll call, I think council is probably aware that during virtual meetings, at times there's a motion and then there's a vote, and then everybody kind of says something at the same time, and it can be difficult to determine, whether everybody actually voted or whatnot. So this is just a clarification. If the presiding officer is unable to determine a vote, then the undetermined vote shall not be considered. So that's paraphrasing language earlier discussed. And then section 3, should technical difficulties arise that prevent any council member appearing via remote from audibly casting their vote or by clear hand signal. So frozen screen, they were in the meeting, but now their picture's not there. We're not sure where they are. Those sorts of issues. There's, 3A then, the presiding officer shall pause the meeting for up to 10 minutes to allow for a resolution to the technical difficulties. No matter shall be discussed by council during this period. The council member that is experiencing technical difficulties shall first and foremost call in, get a signal by telephone, and then they can proceed to cast their vote by telephone. Once telephonic connection is established, or if they're unable to establish by telephonic connection, the council member experiencing the difficulties may attempt to rejoin the meeting using remote communication means. Once rejoining the meeting, they should mute or end their telephonic connection to minimize audio feedback.
Dave, question.
Yes, sir.
In a in a hybrid meeting, would phoning in work? I mean, where would you call? I mean, on a full Zoom meeting, it's easy, right? Because there's an option for on the Zoom call to call in or to do a Zoom. But how would you do that in a hybrid meeting where we had in person and people on Zoom?
Well, Scott, your mic's off.
So Zoom will still be the platform that we use for virtual meetings. And so you would have a default option, even phoning in if that's, if you
Oh,
could
you would?
not, if your video was not working.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, I'm not sure why we do it, but we have a tendency to raise our hand anyway when we say or whatever. So in some ways, that's a good thing because people can at least see your hand if they can't tell that you're actually speaking, but.
Yeah, I think that's because it's so difficult on Zoom to tell who's voting, when everyone's
Exactly.
voting at the same time, you can't really tell who said what. I mean, it doesn't come into play that often because the vast majority of our votes are unanimous vote.
Yeah.
It's when it's something that's not unanimous where it's going to be, an issue, something more controversial.
Although there is a delay asking for the negative vote. You say all those in favor and then we do our thing and then we say all those against, but we have to make sure we say that all those opposed or against the motion.
So- Let me jump in here since this is affecting me quite a bit. As Lenny pointed out, that the vast majority of our votes are unanimous. And so when it's a unanimous vote, I feel like it's a little bit different procedure than if someone is dissenting. If someone's dissenting or voting, in the negative, that's when I believe it should be spelled out. Right. So if someone votes no, that's when this should all be on record. So it's clear and on record. But if it's a unanimous vote, you're adding quite a few steps here in the process, and it doesn't.
How do you know it's always going to be unanimous, though?
So what the difference would be is all in favor, everyone says aye. Any opposed? There's nothing there. We go on. If there is a negative, then I would go back and say, spell it out. Who said yes and who said no for the record.
So are you speaking specifically to the roll call?
Yeah.
Or just generally?
So if
There isn't, let me put it this way, if there's a roll call, which is spelled out for remote meetings, then it's going to be council member 1, council member 2, council member 3. And there are some concerns with that council needs to consider what order, and would it always be the same order? And are there pros and cons to that? So that's something that council needs to consider.
I don't particularly like the roll call.
If there's not a roll call, what the default would be, if you go to voting process, so this is the first area of red line in the procedures. And then if any council, at the conclusion of the vote, the presiding officer shall summarize the total votes, both for and against. So if it's unanimous, that can be captured with one sentence. Everybody voted in favor, there were none opposed, motion carries. That would satisfy that. It's just stating it on the record. It's just slowing down just a touch to make sure that that's captured.
Okay.
And if there is an opposing vote, then I think, you're right that you would perhaps, certainly if it's like 4 or 3, you'd say, council member A, B, C, and D voted for, council members E, F, G voted against, motion passes, something of that sort. But it's just intended to just slow the process down a little bit, not really to bog everything down, because this is going to be applicable to the, motion to approve the consent agenda.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to have to go through a freaking roll call to do the consent agenda item.
But you don't really
Right.
have to. I mean, you don't have to go roll call. If everyone's if it's unanimous, you just simply say
Say
the
it's
motion passes unanimously and
Yeah.
we're moving on, right?
Yeah,
Part of the reason we suggested the roll call is to highlight or delineate if there are technical difficulties. So if you do a unanimous, so I assume it's unanimous, maybe we're not capturing a single council member. Then the question is, how do we then identify that? Then there has to, let's say you take your vote, you think it's unanimous, and then 5 minutes later, you get a call or a text saying, hey, I couldn't vote, I froze up. Then you're doing a revote. So that was some of the logic of having a roll call. Now, I guess you could, prior to a vote, you could say, is everyone, audible, or can you, anyone experience technical difficulties if you want to avoid that step?
Or
Yeah, I mean, I
the,
don't want to have to do a roll call for every single vote.
for virtual meetings without a roll call, I think you would need to suggest they use hand signal in addition to audible tone of voice, so you can
Yeah.
have eyes on everybody. Because at the end of the day, the onus is on the presiding officer to determine that the
I know.
presiding officer understood everybody's vote and
Yeah.
then to restate it. So if you're confident that it's unanimous, then go ahead and say that and move forward. But there's going to be a burden on the presiding officer to determine that and make sure that everybody's vote was clearly cast. And
That's
the roll
good.
call kind of does that for you.
Yeah, I don't mind stating it's unanimous in those circumstances, right? But if it's not unanimous, I want to state who opposed, right? And if it's close, if it's a close one, then we can go to roll call. Then I don't have a problem with that either. But it just happens so rarely. I just don't want to bog down the whole meeting every single time by having to state each who voted yes and who voted no, especially when, like I said, it's most of the time it's always unanimous.
So would it be helpful to request that people raise their hands as well as verbal? Or not? I'm just throwing that out.
I think you're going to have to, and I think what we see, and I think it's a limitation of the iPad. There are times when council's trying to look at their agenda and then the camera goes off, and so you default to your name, and then it makes it harder for, say, Perry trying to record the votes and actually who raised their hand or did not. So we probably need to, if we're going to go this route, then we need to have some practice to make sure everyone is visibly when a vote is being taken.
And also people are comfortable with figuring out where to find the raise the hand little thingy. That's often the problem.
I think we're talking about actually physically
Yeah,
raising.
physical hand raise.
Oh, okay.
I can say, please raise your hand and say aye. Right?
Yeah,
Would that cover it? Please raise your hand and say aye, so you can see a visual.
Yes.
And if I can't tell for some reason, I can specifically ask the council member, did you vote in the positive or in the negative?
Correct.
So the more likely scenario may happen. Let's say one of council members are at an NLC conference, and let's say their connection went down. So then they had a phone in. At some point, the presiding officer is going to have to call out that individual council member and make sure that vote was recorded, or at least go through that process of 10 minutes, make sure that they're back on for the vote, et cetera, et cetera.
If I can't tell what there is, I can, if they're not on the screen, I can say, Councilmember Greenstein, what was your vote? If I can't tell, so then we can hear it. Then I'll say Councilmember Greenstein voted in the affirmative.
do we need to add to this to say raising your hand as well as verbal? Or not?
I don't think so. The preference is verbal. And of course, we're drafting these with the presumption that we're all in the same room. So,
That's true.
but the raising the hand is an alternative. And again, the burden's on the presiding officer to ensure that they have adequately understood all the votes and restated them. And if there's confusion, certainly if I see something that the mayor doesn't comment on, I'm going to jump in and just for clarification purposes. And I'm sure the city manager would do the same thing. So there's a lot of checks and balances in place here. And as the mayor indicated, if it's a contentious vote, I don't think it's going to be an issue because those are always slowed down. And
Yeah. I always, yeah, that's why if it's if I feel like it's even going to be close, I speak up, and usually I will vote. I'll say yay, nay, or whatever. But if it's just a normal course of business, I usually don't speak up, and that would be normally in the affirmative. I don't particularly want to lose that ability, but I guess we wouldn't if I say that it passes unanimously. Right, and I'm stating for the record that it passes unanimously.
Yeah, that would then include your vote, so.
Yeah,
Yeah, the issue with keeping that language in is if technical difficulties arise and we can't resolve them and 10 minutes pass, we don't want a policy that says their silence is affirmative.
Sure.
We just can't have that.
Yeah.
Right.
exactly.
So, yeah, and that's fine. Obviously, everyone besides myself are always voting yes or no. It's just the flow of the meeting for me, because there is a pause between yes and no. All in favor, right? And then any opposed. And so it's always weird when I say all in favor and I mean, I don't know. I guess it's just a preference of mine.
I get what you're saying, because whenever I chair a meeting, I do the same thing. If it's controversial, if it's a split vote kind of thing, then I make sure to be heard. But on the typical consent agenda, things like that, anything that's unanimous, when I'm chairing a meeting,
Yeah.
I never verbalize my vote.
I
Yeah.
always do.
And
I
any of the
know.
committees I sit on.
So,
I'm
okay.
kind of didactic about that. So
Yeah, I know you do, Deputy Mayor, and that's fine, but that's not how I do it.
Scott, you had something.
Yeah, I know it's always hard to wordsmith in a committee type setting, but so I just want to make sure we're clear. So if we get rid of the roll call, then you're defaulting to either an audible or a hand signal. But there's got to be some instruction to the presiding officer to make sure that everyone can cast their vote. I guess at some point there's some sense in there that sort of affirms that the presiding officer will affirm everyone's able to either vote audibly or by hand signal. Just so we don't get caught up in this issue that someone froze and they assumed their silence was an affirmative vote or whatever. Just so, and then that would then put us into that we're having technical difficulty and we'll go through that procedure.
Well, and the thing is if everyone says aye and I see, everyone goes up, I'll state, it passes unanimously. Now, if there was technical difficulties and I miss it, obviously when someone comes back, I need to be like, sometimes I could just miss it all too because of a technical difficulty. But
Sure.
usually I'm usually pretty good, through the discussion. I can sort of hear where people are going on an issue, if they're going to be for it or negative. And so if it sounds like someone's going to be in the negative, I can always slow things down and make sure I capture that as well.
So possibly if the language says that to vote, your video has to be on so everyone can be seen, I think that would be your first indication that things are technically working. And if they're not, then that may be then you could see it, or can I hear that council member audibly? And then that's how you can kind of decipher if there's a technical difficulty.
And I guess my comments on this, the policy language, I think it requires the presiding officer to summarize the vote. So I think a lot of these concerns, like keeping the camera on during voting, those would maybe be suggestions offered by the presiding officer to other council members. Like for you to meet the policies, everybody's camera needs to be on, kind of like training on I think the council members will all kind of figure this out pretty quickly, how to make sure that they're being heard clearly on each vote to help keep meetings moving along.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing is where there's some difficulty in this is like for Councilmember Stedman, for example, his video at his house, for whatever reason, seems to be bad. And so it's always better when he turns his video off. It's because it's using less bandwidth. And so I just need to make sure when he's voting in that circumstance,
Turns it on.
if looks like there's some technical difficulties, I am make sure everyone's capturing the vote total.
You might
Well,
want to
I'm
say
just-
that, please.
That-
just say for the vote, please make sure your video is on so we can see you and hear you.
During a vote. That's fine.
So are we changing this slightly before, because this is to go before the council for a vote, so I need to
So
capture.
any motion to forward to the full council, I think what I'm hearing is that it would include an amendment to remove the provision for a roll call. Otherwise, be forwarding this all on to council, and I can certainly make that change. And then, of course, the full council is going to be able to have this very conversation before it ever passes. So
That's
a lot of
true.
these details will be ironed out.
And any council member can always call for a roll call vote as well, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
If there's, yeah,
Yeah, if there's question, I mean, it doesn't happen often, but
yeah, I wouldn't want to do a roll call every single vote.
no,
It'd be nice to not include, find a way
yeah, that'll
around.
just add unnecessary time and confusion, I think.
Yeah,
okay, so with that, we're talking about pulling out the roll call vote. So are we ready to make a motion to move it on to the full council with that amendment?
I would move to send this to the full council as amended.
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, motion carried. So that worked out okay.
I see all the hands. I don't know if I,
Very, very clear voting there.
Yeah.
Like it.
Well,
Can
we
I just-
don't want your hand to go outside of the video or that virtual screen. Mine's actually on a real thing, but
Yeah.
virtual, you won't have your hand.
I think this is just a good reminder to make sure we're clearly stating the votes, right? And I'm not always as good as that. I don't, but if I add it passes unanimously, then that should solve a lot of this. And then if it doesn't pass unanimously, I just point out who voted in the negative, right?
Yeah,
And that only happens. That doesn't happen very often either. So,
but I have voted in the negative
oh sure,
at times, and not necessarily on Zoom, but that has to be documented. So
Yeah.
and I'll try to be better at at that on who voted in the negative. And if it
okay, so that seems to be where we're at, and we're at the end of our agenda. Is there anything else?
Yeah, can I bring something up real quick?
Sure.
I was talking with Graham Sackerson, everyone knows Graham, and I had a lunch with him, and he goes out on a regular basis to pick up garbage, and he's gone through this whole process, and then has found like other people who are sort of doing it. He's talked to a couple other people, and he was wondering if there's some sort of a volunteer program that we could look at setting up that could that people could sign up for, where they could get Lacey City vests that stands out, and maybe like a bucket and a picker up thing and that could be picked up at the Public Works office and signed out and then come back in, and then the place where if they do pick up trash, and he says it's usually like carrying around like a 5-gallon bucket is what works, and you just pick up stuff and put it in the bucket, and then you can throw that garbage away someplace that doesn't have a place to throw it away. So just start like a volunteer program, because I think as we have all noticed, especially more now than ever, there's a lot more trash that seems like to be out there. And I know we have taken some steps, and some people, we've made a hire to go out and do some of this stuff. But I like the idea of starting a volunteer program, call it, community cares program, where maybe we can get,
I think that's interesting. And it's funny, I just, before I came online here for the two meetings, is I read this thing about pogging. And that is, and it started in Africa, one of them, I'm not sure, Nigeria or something, but it's spreading. So they're actually exercising these people while they're cleaning things up. And it's now a big kind of a spreading across the world. So yeah, I think that's a
So,
good
yeah, so-
idea.
yeah,
So
the
let me
other guy-
revisit that. Yeah, let me revisit Public Works. We do have our Adopt a Street program, but that may be,
Yeah,
they're
the-
also maybe
Adopt a
concentrating in
Street-
other areas.
Yeah, the Adopt a Street program just isn't what it used to be. It used to be, businesses would like to get their name out and they put it out there, Adopt a Street. But this would just be something where we could set up a program. And it is exercise too, right? That's why
Yeah.
the guy that Graham's talking to, he goes out every day he just goes out on a daily walk, and he goes, well, if I'm walking, I might as well pick up some garbage. And so all it would take is just a little bit of an investment on our side to figure out the volunteer program, a little bit of equipment, a vest, a bucket, and picker upper thing. And then we could figure out, how to set it up. And I told Graham, I go, geez, that sounds like a really good idea. And let me pass it, through our general government and see what you guys thought. So
Okay, we'll take a look at that. Pick up a ton,
Simple
to
enough.
lose a ton.
What,
So it's
Lenny?
always good to get the community involved, so.
Exactly.
it's just a small investment on our side, and it could be a big return, and pride in
Make
our-
people feel good
Yeah.
about
And there is a lot of
Goodness.
trash out there.
There is a ton of trash. It's just
And
unbelievable.
everywhere I go now, I'll tell you what, masks everywhere.
Yep.
It's
Masks,
unbelievable how many
yeah.
people are dropping their masks on the ground and leaving them there.
Yeah.
That's disgusting too.
It is
Yeah.
disgusting, but you see them everywhere now.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Okay.
so you'll look into that, Scott, and maybe get back to us on what a program could look like.
You bet.
Okay, appreciate it.
Okay, so is there anything else to bring up?
No, since we were talking about virtual meetings, I think I've talked to individual council members, but at some point we need to start talking. We'll have another discussion at a work session about going back to a in-person type setting. Again, we'd like to get through Thanksgiving, but at some point, I think individually, I've all heard at some point when we go back to more traditional way of doing our meetings. And so we'll just have to set that up, but it'd be good to have a discussion with council about that, how we conduct business that way again.
Yeah.
By the
I mean,
way,
at this
the
point-
Commission for Equity, remote and in-person seemed to work just fine, because Carolyn and I were at the in-person meeting, and it seemed to be, not that anyone responded at the time because they'd already been on in Monday, but yeah,
At this point, with holidays and everything else, I would think that we should shoot for, first meeting in January, being back in person again. I mean, we can only do this for so long. At some point, we got to get back to chambers and have meetings.
Yeah.
And,
Mm.
with the exception of one council member, everyone's vaccinated.
Yeah. And so I guess that's what it really comes down to is will we have to be wearing a mask the entire time if we're in City Hall? That's the difficulty for me. It's I don't particularly want to sit there with a mask on the entire time during the meeting. That's when it gets really difficult to say, is that a yes or a no, or
Yeah.
if you can't see that makes it really difficult for that. So
What are the rules on that now, though, with the most recent?
So any public type meeting, you're supposed to wear a mask. I don't
It is,
think that's,
even
I don't think
vaccinated
that's
or
changed.
unvaccinated, still the rule.
Correct.
you could spread it out though, and then make, and others could do it remotely, but you could spread it out so that we're a little bit farther apart.
well, if we're all vaccinated, but the thing is you'd think if we're 6 feet apart and vaccinated, we wouldn't have to wear a mask.
Right. But
You
Everyone
just-
go
you would
get the
just-
booster and we'll,
Yeah, I mean, we'll have that discussion at the work session, but my understanding is, at least with the health officer and also the governor's order, going back to whatever it was, as a condition to wear masks in public unless you're doing certain activities like eating. I know I've seen public meetings where someone's been at the podium and pulled their mask off. I don't know if that's an exception, but I think in general, you're supposed to wear your mask.
is there anything new with the OSHA rules? And I think it was the Fifth Circuit that put the stay. Does that, what was the determination on that? Does that apply or doesn't it apply to stay, being that we're not in the Fifth Circuit?
So there are some states apparently that are within our circuit that are part of that lawsuit. So I think it's been reported that they're sorting through that legal process, but Illinois is still having to promulgate their rules in response to OSHA. I
I
think we'll
thought they already
know.
did. I thought they came out and matched OSHA.
Well, they have until December 5th.
I thought they actually did that. I thought they already came out.
I've not heard that.
I haven't either. Well,
No,
you know, just an aside, I know when you go to church, I'm sorry to bring religion in this, but when the priest begins to speak, he takes his mask off because he's quite a ways away, and then they put it back on. And all the parishioners theoretically have their masks on. There's one guy that thinks the virus comes out of his chin, but I'm sorry, so there must be some kind of
while you're talking, I don't know.
a kind of a change to allow somebody to speak from a distance. I don't know.
I guess I need to look into
Yeah,
that.
we'll look at all those things. I just want to, again, we just need to have to start this discussion again as we go into 2022.
Okay.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
Well, at least according to the latest numbers, it seems like it's finally going down here in Thurston County, and so we'll see.
Yeah, but they're expecting another big winter surge, they're saying.
Yeah, they are.
Okay.
Okay, so we're at the end of our agenda. We've discussed everything that we need to discuss. So I'm going to close the meeting and enjoy Thanksgiving.